Mulcahy, thanks for tuning in today. This hour we have a special program, a live debate between the candidates for Minnesota Attorney General. Keith Ellison is the incumbent. He's a DFLer. He previously served in the Minnesota House and in Congress for 12 years. He's seeking a second term as Attorney General. Jim Schultz is the challenger. He's a Republican making his first run for political office. He's an attorney and most recently at a Minneapolis investment firm. Now, the rules for this debate are fairly simple. I'll ask the questions. I'll give you each a couple minutes to answer. There will be time for follow-ups and rebuttals. You're not running for the U.S. Senate, so you don't have to filibuster. You'll have plenty of time to talk. There is one hard and fast rule, though, and I will strictly enforce this one. You can't both talk at the same time. If you do that, if you talk over each other, nobody will be able to hear what you say. And tragically, people might even turn off the radio, and we don't want that to happen.
No.
Now, the candidates will each have a minute at the beginning and a minute at the end for opening and closing statements. We flipped a coin before we started, and Jim Schultz, you get the first minute for an opening statement.
All right. Thank you, Mike. I am Jim Schultz. I'm a fifth-generation Minnesotan, a husband, a father. My great-great-grandfather came here in 1875, and I love this state. And I stepped into this race because I feel, as I know many Minnesotans feel, that we are losing the state we have known and loved. And at the center of that is an Attorney General's office, an Attorney General in Keith Ellison, that is led an office disconnected from the needs of Minnesotans. Keith Ellison must not be reelected for Attorney General for 3 reasons. Number 1, he is extreme. He backed defunding the police. That is extraordinarily wrong and reckless, and it has helped deliver extraordinary crime to our communities. Number 2, he has demonstrated remarkable incompetence. He presided over the greatest fraud in Minnesota history, $250 million going out to someone, to feeding our future. And number 3, he has been dishonest on both of those fronts. And so we need a new Attorney General, and that's what I'll be.
That's Jim Schultz. Keith Ellison, your chance for a minute for an opening statement.
Thank you, Mike. Let me first of all just say it has been my great honor to be the Attorney General over the last 4 years. We've had extraordinary 4 years. We've had 4 years in which we had a worldwide pandemic, global pandemic. We've seen the murder of George Floyd right in our state. And so we've come through it. People have stepped up. They've looked out for each other. They've helped each other. And yeah, we've had some tough times, but we got through it together as Minnesotans. This race offers a very stark contrast. On the one hand, I will protect your right to a safe legal abortion. Jim will attack that. I have presided over an office that has prosecuted nearly 50 serious crimes, murder, criminal sexual conduct. Jim has never set foot in a courtroom in his life. And I have fought for consumers and workers, and Jim has been a hedge fund lawyer enlarging the profits of the biggest companies in the world during a pandemic.
That's a minute. Thank you. Well, let me start with the big picture on my first question. Jim Schultz, what do you see as the primary role of the Attorney General's office, and what would your top priority be over the next 4 years?
My top priority is crime, and crime, dealing with the extraordinary public safety crisis in our state. There were 100 murders in Minneapolis last year, 650 carjackings, crime and violence bleeding out to the suburbs and the rest of the state. That is an outrage. And I will tell you, amidst of that, we have an Attorney General who backed defunding the police. There are few acts in Minnesota's history as reckless and wrong as that. We cannot have that. So we need an Attorney General's office that's focused on prosecuting violent crime, rebuilding a criminal division where there are now only 3 criminal prosecutors. Only 3 criminal prosecutors for a state of 5 million people. Alongside that, we have to ensure that we deal with the extraordinary nonprofit fraud in our state, and we have to ensure that businesses who commit serious wrongdoing in our state are held accountable. I will do all 3. Right now, we don't have an Attorney General's office doing that.
Keith Ellison, what do you think the main role of the Attorney General's office is, and what would your top priority be over the next 4 years?
Well, under Minnesota law, the main job of the Attorney General's office is to be the chief legal officer for the state. Actually, it's not the chief law enforcement officer of the state, but the job is to stand with and defend Minnesotans who are being victimized by predatory business practices. It's to represent our state agencies. It is to be there on the side of consumers. That is what our historic role has been and what it should be. And let me just add, we do have a criminal role to play, an important and but defined role. County attorneys are responsible for prosecuting local crime. They have the responsibility and the opportunity to call on us, and they do. Since I've been there, we have never lost a single case. We have taken the cases that have been asked of us. That's why we prosecuted someone for first-degree attempted murder who shot a police officer in Albert Lee just last week. But we've done so many more, and I've sat in the room with victims who've suffered because of crime. And I think one thing that Jim and I agree on, yeah, crime is a very serious matter, and we all have to make sure that we have safe communities. One of the things I do as Attorney General is not just prosecute crime, but also bring civil tools to bring forth a law and order in our community, including going after nuisance properties,
Okay.
dealing with gun trafficking, and I'll talk more about it more later.
Okay. Jim Schultz, some of your critics have said, and we've heard Keith Ellison say already today, that the fact you've never tried a case means that you don't have the experience to be Attorney General. What relevant experience do you bring to the job that shows you'd be effective in carrying out your campaign promises?
I will put my legal experience up alongside Keith's any day of the week. I am proud to say, when it comes to my credentials, I graduated from Harvard Law School, toward the top of my class. I've worked at the Pentagon. I've worked at two of the most sophisticated, most well-respected law firms in the entire country. I am really proud of my legal record. I actually bring private sector experience to this office. Keith, of course, when he came into office, had been in Congress for 15 years. His license was inactive at that time. He hadn't practiced for 15 years. He spent a few years as a criminal defense attorney defending violent criminals in our communities. My experience is one where I can step into the office and provide real leadership. There's plenty of litigators in the Attorney General's office right now. We don't need more of those. What we need is leadership with the right priorities. That's what I'll deliver every day of the week. And it's funny. And Walter Mondale, he was when he became Attorney General, he had 4 years of legal experience at 32. I bring a heck of a lot more than that, and I'll say he was a pretty good Attorney General, and I'm going to be a very good Attorney General as well.
Keith Ellison, you've heard Jim Schultz say you voted to defund the police, or you supported defunding the police. How do you respond to that?
It's just not true. The fact of the matter is that the first hearing that I ever sat in as Attorney General was a legislative hearing where I was asking for more money for law enforcement. That's the truth, the documentable, provable truth, is that I have asked for millions of dollars over the last 4 years to prosecute violent criminals and put them where they belong, which is in incarceration, and I have sat with victims who have suffered at the hands of these folks. The fact of the matter is, if I'm supposed to be this defunder, I must be the worst one ever because I am seeking more resources for law enforcement. And let me just say, in Minneapolis, and that ballot measure was only about Minneapolis, not the rest of the state. I understand that Minneapolis is my town. I love it, but it has had its unique challenges. And most people will agree that it is a good idea to expand how we do policing to include mental health responders, people who can help with the homeless folks, people who can get involved with gang violence prevention, and that is what Minneapolis has in fact done. Minneapolis has now a commissioner of community safety, something I wanted to see, and they are collaborating across a number of lines. And I've been in touch with leaders in law enforcement in Minneapolis, and they're telling me that things are not where they want them to be, but they're getting better every day. So that's the truth of the matter. And thanks for asking.
Jim Schultz?
I have to say, it is deeply disturbing that the chief law enforcement officer of our state, Keith Ellison, just walked through an entire couple minutes of complete lies. He backed the Minneapolis Charter Amendment. Everyone knows that the Minneapolis Charter Amendment was focused on defunding and deconstructing the Minneapolis police force. That's why the Star Tribune opposed it. That's why many Democratic leaders opposed it. Amy Klobuchar, Angie Craig, Mayor Jacob Fry. But Keith Ellison and his other extremist friends, whether it be Ilhan Omar or Mary Moriarty, backed it because the motive was to defund the police in Minneapolis. That is deeply wrong, and it is immoral.
Keith Ellison.
Yeah, this is a poorly informed point of view. I know all of the people you just mentioned, Jim, personally, and I can assure you that all of them agree that we needed to make meaningful reforms in policing, even though they were vote no. And even though I supported it, I always believe we had to have a well-resourced, well-funded police department. It's a complicated matter which goes back years and years and requires solutions, not just slogans. And the fact of the matter is, we, as the city of Minneapolis, had a dialogue that actually benefited our city. We have a commissioner of community safety. We are doing more collaborative policing. We are working together. And the people who want to use crime as a political matter, and somebody who runs around saying how apolitical they are, it's disturbing to me to see you try to politicize crime in this matter. The fact of the matter is, Mike, Minneapolis is getting better every day. And I'm confident that we will deal with the problems that we have. And I'll just say, I have stepped forward to assist in the area of gun trafficking and dealing with problem properties and dealing with the opioid crisis, which of course is causing quite a bit of problems in our community and causing loss of life. We've brought back over $300 million to try to deal with opioids and fentanyl in this crisis and for treatment, for research, and for prevention. So that's the story on that. The rest of it is just politics stuff.
Jim Schultz, let me come back to something that came up earlier. The Attorney General's office really doesn't have the opportunity to prosecute crime unless they're asked by a county attorney, right? So why would you add all these criminal prosecutors? How would you get involved in these cases?
Good question.
So the Attorney General of Minnesota, either he doesn't know the law or he's lying about the law. So under 609-902, subdivision 9, that's RICO. The Attorney General's Office of Minnesota has direct authority, original jurisdiction to take RICO cases. And RICO cases can be drug trafficking cases, they can be human trafficking cases, they can be cases around violent crime. Keith Ellison has not used that tool once during his time as Attorney General. So all this stuff about county attorneys are the only ones who can take cases initially, that's completely false. Now the question is, does the Attorney General of Minnesota not know what the law of the state of Minnesota is, or is he just lying about it? But either way, the fact is he has failed the people of Minnesota. He has tools available to him. Finally, I'll just say, the Attorney General of Minnesota could be a real support for county attorneys around the state to aggressively prosecute crime. He brags about doing 50 crimes or doing 50 cases over the past few years. That's like me bragging about running 5 miles over the course of the past few years. Yeah, maybe true, but that is a pathetic record for an office of 150 attorneys.
All right, Keith Ellison.
Well, the main point, though, Jim, is that's how many county attorneys have asked us to do. We have done the cases they've asked us to do, and we have never lost. And, think about the victims, Jim. As you just say what we're doing is nothing, I happen to know that there's a family full of people whose parents were murdered in Todd County who think that what we did is quite something. In fact, I know about, there's the families who lost whose loved one was shot in Albert Lee. They care about the horror that their family member went to. So I'd ask you to have a little bit of respect for the victims as you say that what we do is nothing. Let me also say, Jim wants to quote statutes. I'll just say, read the statute 8.01, which says that county attorneys may ask the Attorney General to take cases, or the governor may appoint. We do not have original jurisdiction on criminal cases other than Medicaid fraud, which we do quite a lot of, and I'm very proud of the unit that we have. And, it's not just 3 prosecutors. It's actually more than that. We have people who do criminal appeals. We've now done over 167 of those. We do predatory violent offenders. We have people who do that. We do quite a lot, and you're talking about a civil tool. We use civil tools all the time. on gun trafficking, on dealing with fentanyl, on dealing with problem properties, on using the nuisance statute to try to stop bad conduct that we've seen around our community. So we use the statute all the time. And so I'll just say that there again, read the statute, folks, and see who's right.
That's Keith Ellison. He is the DFL Attorney General of Minnesota. His challenger is Jim Schultz. He's a Republican, and you're listening to a live debate from MPR News. Jim Schultz, you have proposed adding a number of criminal attorneys to the criminal division. Mm-hmm. How many would you add? How much would that cost? How would you get it done?
So just one thing, the Attorney General is wrong here. So Chapter 8 does outline some authority for the Attorney General. There are other statutes, including 602, 902, under which he can prosecute criminal cases, not civil cases, criminal cases. He has not done so. He has failed to do so. He's failed to do so.
So
beyond that, now, I'm going to add dramatically more criminal prosecutors to the office. We have to have it. It's embarrassing that the Attorney General has not done this. We need to respond to this historic moment in our state in which we're living through the worst increase in violent crime in many decades, and it is not enough for the Attorney General of Minnesota to throw up his hands and say, well, I can't really do much here. The only thing I can do is sue Fleet Farm. That is not enough. That is not enough, and what we need to do is to have a roster of world-class criminal prosecutors that can support county attorneys around the state and ensure that we end this revolving door where criminals are not held accountable for their actions. Criminals don't feel like there are penalties associated with their crime right now. And so as a result, they commit dramatically more crime. We're going to end that.
What happens if the legislature doesn't give you the money to do that? What do you stop doing in order to do that?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I've been very open on this. I mean, unlike Keith Ellison, I won't show up at the legislature at the 11th hour without having built any relationships with the legislature. I've already started working on building relationships across the aisle in the legislature so that we can get the funding we need for key priorities. Now, this is the fundamental priority for the Attorney General's office of the state of Minnesota right now. To the extent we don't get the funding, we will reallocate resources from within the office. It has a $50 million budget. It is a massive budget. We can move resources around as needed to ensure we have the criminal prosecutors that we need, and I will absolutely do it to deal with the people being shot on our streets every day. And it's not enough for the Attorney General to throw up his hands after the legislature says no.
Keith Ellison.
First of all, I want to just call for a fact check on what our authority is to override the wishes of a local county attorney on a crime. I'll just leave it right there. Let me also say that, look, I was a state legislator. I know all the state legislators. They're friends on both sides of the aisle. Let me say, I worked with Senator Rosen and Representative Baker to pass the legislation that returned 75% of all the money that we won back to local counties, and I did it on a bipartisan basis. So the idea of who knows the legislature around here, I hope nobody's seriously entertaining this. I was a legislator for 4 years here. I was a federal legislator, not for 15 years, just 12. And so, that's wrong. In terms of reallocation, let me just note, we have a statutory obligation to represent state agencies. That's Chapter 8.06, Mr. Schultz. And so let me just say, we can't just reallocate as we care to. We've reallocated as much as we can, and we'll do more if we can get more money. We've made that very clear. And as a matter of fact, we've got the support of the governor and the state legislature and many people in the Senate. We just haven't had the support of Mary Kiffmeyer, quite frankly. And, she's not there anymore, so we're hoping that we will be able to break through in the next term. But, the idea that you're going to do better in the legislature than we have done is really silly, given that you've never served in the body at all and never worked with them whatsoever. And you can't just reallocate the way you're saying. You can't do it.
Jim Schultz, let me ask you a question that goes back to some of how this all started, really, and that is that a police officer in Minneapolis killed somebody. If the Hennepin County Attorney's Office asked you to criminally prosecute a police officer for killing someone, would you do it?
Well, absolutely. To the extent a case was to be brought, absolutely. The killing of George Floyd, I don't think anybody could have watched the video of the killing of George Floyd without feeling physically ill. That was so deeply wrong. It was a murder. It was second-degree murder. And the fact is, if comparable circumstances or other instances where police violate the law, we would absolutely hold them accountable. Absolutely. And to the extent it's in partnership with county attorneys, or to the extent the office were to take the case exclusively, absolutely. We have to ensure that everyone in our state is held accountable for crime, and that includes police officers. Now, the fact is, the bad police officers out there are few and far between. Unfortunately, the rhetoric of many in public office, including Keith Ellison, have slandered and maligned many folks in law enforcement. We can't have that. And we have to ensure that we have an office that fundamentally supports law enforcement, even as we hold them accountable. As any police officer will acknowledge, they totally expect to be held accountable to standards.
And Derek Chauvin is appealing his murder conviction. Attorney General Ellison brought in a special a team of lawyers in that case. Would you keep those lawyers on the case, and would you fight to uphold that conviction?
I would certainly fight to uphold the conviction. In terms of keeping ultimately I'd have to review the prosecutors on the case, see if we're aligned strategically and otherwise. But I certainly would be receptive to doing so. What we need, absolutely, we have to ensure that Derek Chauvin was appropriately prosecuted, and we have to we would continue to bring that case forward. Absolutely.
Attorney General Ellison, another high-profile case, Kim Potter, who shot and killed Dante Wright in Brooklyn Center. When your office took over the case from the Washington County attorney, the original charge was second-degree manslaughter. Your office increased that to first degree. Why did you do that?
Well, thank you for the question. What we did is we took a fresh look at the case. And I just want to note that, that case was originally in Hennepin County. Pete Orput took that case for Hennepin County. And then Pete Orput, who was a wonderful man and a dear friend of mine and a great county attorney who was, we lost him to a serious illness. Before he died, he said, look, I can't have these protesters out here. Would you take this case? And I said, yes. I didn't ask for the case. But what we did is we took a fresh look at what the facts were. What were the facts? What the facts is that Kim Potter shot Dante Wright with a 9mm Glock when she thought she had a taser. So in other words, she didn't know she had a gun in her hand when she used it. We thought that was a reckless discharge of a firearm. And when somebody dies as a result of that, under the statutory law, that's first-degree manslaughter. Now, the charge and the sentence are not necessarily the same. We do have sentencing guidelines, but after she was convicted by a jury of her peers, the judge gave her a more lenient sentence. We did not appeal it. She said she was sorry. That meant something to me. I thought that was important. And so that's how that case was handled. We charged what we thought the facts showed. The jury agreed. And she was sentenced according to law and was given a downward departure, which we did not oppose.
Jim Schultz, the Republican candidate for governor, Scott Jensen, has said if he's elected, he would try to commute Kim Potter's sentence. Of course, the governor can't do that on his own. There's a three-member pardons board, the Attorney General, the governor, and the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. Would you vote to commute Kim Potter's sentence?
I'll say first, Kim Potter served for 26 years admirably on a police force. She was a real leader on her police force. What she received by being prosecuted for first-degree manslaughter was entirely inappropriate from the Attorney General's office. Any attorney who looks at the first-degree manslaughter statute and reads it can only conclude that she did not commit first-degree manslaughter. It was fundamentally politically motivated. And this is so representative of Attorney General Ellison's office. It's all about the politics around it. He upcharged her to first-degree manslaughter for political reasons. That was deeply, deeply wrong. We cannot have an Attorney General's office influenced by politics. Now, I have been on the record.
Keith Ellison just respond quickly, and then we'll come back.
Okay.
So you might not realize this, Jim, but every defendant has a right to make a motion for dismissal for lack of probable cause. Her able defense counsel did so, and Judge Chu denied the motion on the grounds that there was probable cause for the charge. The case went forward to a jury of 12 Hennepin County residents, and they found her guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. Now, I believe in the jury system. There was nothing political about this. This was entirely by the book. This case will withstand any sort of appeal. It was a fair trial, 100%. And the thing is, the charge and the sentence are different. That's just, but I know that because I've been a lawyer for 32 years. I know that because I know my way around the criminal courts in Hennepin County, Ramsey County, federal court, state court, appellate court, any kind of court. And so you would say these things because you simply have zero experience dealing with it.
Jim Schultz.
Well, same thing. I mean, Keith, you did spend a few years as a criminal prosecutor. You represented a man who was implicated in the killing of in the execution of a police officer. You represented a man who shook to death his 5-month-old son. You represented a man who was a cocaine dealer who murdered 3 people. You do have some relevant experience in the area. I will say, just on this, I've been very open on the commutation of Kim Potter's sentence. Absolutely, her sentence should be commuted. That was mob justice. It was not representative of Minnesota values. Now, Keith Ellison will say, oh, well, this work I did, back in the 90s is I was a criminal defense attorney. And that's fine. It's fine that we have to obviously need capable criminal defense attorneys. But unfortunately, he has brought the mentality of criminal defense attorneys to the Attorney General's office, where he is fundamentally focused on the criminals, ensuring that criminals get what he thinks is appropriate justice and not the rights of victims to be protected from crime. That is a theme throughout his time as Attorney General. It is deeply disturbing, and you can see it through all of his time in office.
Keith Ellison, please respond.
27 convicted criminals spending time in Minnesota prisons because the AG's office convicted them would disagree. We have prosecuted and convicted the most serious criminals in our state from Aiken County, Todd County, from Pennington County, from all over the state of Minnesota, including Hennepin, and we've even reviewed cases in Ramsey, although we never charged any out. This is simply a poorly informed point of view. It's inaccurate, and we have been very, and again, I look at the men and women in our criminal group, and they are very hardworking, diligent. They have great compassion for victims. I've sat with victims myself. You never have, by the way. You never have sat with a victim. I've sat with families grieving, crying, raging over what happened to their loved one, and I feel their passion and their pain. But it's something that you can only think about theoretically speaking in a political campaign. And I think you're the one who's politicizing this. And if I just may finish here, Mike, the bottom line is I've prosecuted, I've also defended. That's how come I know the whole system. That's actually an asset. And I believe in the Sixth Amendment to the United States Constitution and the Minnesota Constitution, which gives criminal defendants the right to counsel and other rights. Now, he's attacking that, but what kind of democracy will we have if people didn't have some rights? Yes, I am a prosecutor who prosecutes hard, but also believes in the defendant's rights, too.
Jim Schultz.
Keith, I actually have sat with a victim. The victim was my sister. A man careened his car into her yard one morning. He was on chase with police. He was shooting out his back windows at police that morning. There was gunfire on her front lawn. It left multiple bullet holes in her home while she was there. Police officers had to rush in to get her out of the house so she wasn't hit by a stray bullet. I still remember her calling me crying that morning. I still remember meeting with the BCA that night with the tape all taped off around it. I have sat with victims. And frankly, Keith, I think part of the reason why people are so disturbed is that despite seeing the incredible numbers of victims in our communities, you have continually backed extreme policies that have led to the incredible violence on our streets. You've supported defunding the police. You've got behind low bail and no bail policies that have let out criminals that shouldn't be on the streets. You've supported organizations like the Minnesota Freedom Fund that have, again, let out Minnesota criminals that should not be on our streets. And so you can, pretend to be an incredible, capable attorney every day of the week, though I know many people in town would disagree with that. The fact is, Keith, you have the wrong priorities in the Attorney General's office. Minnesotans need an Attorney General's office that they can trust the judgment of our Attorney General. Right now, the Minnesotans feel like they cannot trust their Attorney General to have appropriate judgment. They cannot trust him to tell the truth. And unfortunately, Keith, that is a fact and part of the reason why you've become so deeply unpopular in our state.
Let's let Keith Ellison respond, and then I'll ask you both the same question.
Jim, I want to sincerely tell you that I'm sorry about what happened to your sister, and I'm sorry what happened to you. It's horrible, and I want to be clear. That is a sincere statement. But Jim, that is exactly why we're suing Fleet Farm, because there are too many guns on the street. There's too many guns out there. There have been about 200 mass shootings in the last 300 days, and we're trying to go to make sure that gun sellers do so competently, do so without negligence, and are not aiding and abetting people who are engaged in gun trafficking. That's to protect your sister, man. And I mean that, because I heard your sister was a Northside resident. Yeah. I'm a Northside resident. I raised all 4 of my kids on the North Side. And I want you to know that to you and your sister and your entire family, that is a horrible tragedy that we are trying to stop, but we've got to take guns off the street to do it. Now, you mentioned the whole thing around bail. Folks, in Minnesota, the Constitution says that every offense you can put up money bail, and if you raise enough, you can get out. All offenses are bailable. The fact of the matter is that bail bond agencies bail people out every single day. Some of those people abscond and disobey with their pretrial release conditions. And so what I'm saying is, should we discuss how to say that your pretrial release should depend upon your return to court and your dangerousness in the community? In the federal court, Jim, let me just explain this to you. In the federal court, if you are deemed to be dangerous or a flight risk, you can't get out at all. But on the other side, if you will come back to court, you can get out on a signature, and therefore you don't need to put up any money. I guess I would disagree with you that just having a strict system where 2 people are accused of doing the same thing, one has money, one doesn't, and the one with the money gets out pre-trial, and the other one without money sits in jail, and sometimes ends up pleading guilty to a crime that they don't believe they commit simply to get credit for time served. I just don't agree that we don't need to look at our bail system, but I think we should do it carefully. We should include everybody in the conversation, and it should not be money that makes the determination.
Jim Schultz, quickly.
Now, I'd say a couple things there. Now, you may not know this, Keith, because you really haven't been at the legislature during your time as Attorney General. Ramsey County Sheriff Bob Fletcher has said you've been completely absent from public safety discussions at the legislature. But there was actually a bill to increase the penalties associated with straw purchases in Minnesota, That died. Your office said nothing about it, did nothing to push it forward. And now, your solution to violent crime in Minnesota is suing Fleet Farm. That's your solution to violent crime in Minnesota. Do you really think, Keith, that violent crime in Minnesota is going to be addressed in full by suing Fleet Farm? That's your solution, and maybe suing a couple other businesses. How about this? How about instead of that, or maybe alongside that, we aggressively prosecute violent crime? We have an Attorney General's office that uses the tools available to it under 602, 902, to aggressively prosecute crimes that are under RICO, to ensure that we have an adequately resourced office that this isn't just 3 criminal prosecutors, up from 1 just a year ago, but 3 criminal prosecutors in an office of 150 attorneys to support the work of county attorneys around the state. So it is not enough for the Attorney General of Minnesota to throw up his hands and say, in October of election year, well, I think I'm going to go after, spin the wheel, Fleet Farm. That is not enough, Keith. And the fact is, the fact that you cite that as an instance of you leading on public safety is a complete and total embarrassment.
Keith, no, I actually cite the near 50 cases that we're prosecuting now as evidence of my leadership on public safety. But let me just say this about Fleet Farm. It's important for everybody listening to know that the thing that really got this case started, Jim, there's nothing about the timing that should concern you. Mayor Carter called me and said, after the tragic shooting about a year ago at West 7th, where 14 people were shot and 1 was killed, said, look, man, this guy is over here buying guns, and these guns turned up in the West 7th shooting at the truck stop. And there's got to be something we can do to cut off the supply. Is there anything we can do? So you know what? It's nothing like this, to our knowledge, has been done before. So we got to work doing the research. We found it, we worked on it, and when it was ready, we filed the case. So that's what's going on, Jim. It's the fact that we listened to a mayor, responded to a mass shooting incident where 14 people were shot and 1 died, and the woman who lost her daughter stood with me just the other day and said, I'm glad you're doing this. This woman hugged me, and I was almost in tears, Jim, I honestly was, because this woman had lost the most precious person in her life. It's not politics, man. It's real. It's serious. And going upstream with on guns is the right thing to do. And let me also say, you say that's the only program. It's not the only program. It's the over $300 million dealing with the opioid crisis. It's the bad landlords who, in North Minneapolis, we brought a lawsuit against a guy named Steve Meldahl, had 267 properties that were in such bad condition that Judge Robin, in his order, found. He wrote, the conditions described here are so bad, they are of biblical plague proportions, rats, gnats, and mice, and he cited for us against this bad landlord. That's part of keeping the community safe. So it's opioids, it's safe housing, it's dealing with nuisance properties that we're dealing with right now, trying to make sure that proper conduct is going on at those businesses. And before you get too sympathetic to these folks, like you are about ExxonMobil, by the way, let me just note that other Northside liquor stores do run a good business. This one that you're criticizing me about, Merwin's, is a public nuisance, and we're dealing with it right now.
Okay.
I wish you joined me in that.
Let's remind everybody you're listening to a debate between DFL Attorney General Keith Ellison and his Republican challenger Jim Schultz, live on MPR News. I'm Mike Mulcahy. I'd like to get to some other topics if we can, if that's all right with you, Jim Schultz.
Can I just say one more thing? So Keith Ellison going after Fleet Farm, it's been out there for a while, but he's going after Fleet Farm. He's going after liquor stores that frankly have been nuisance properties for years, Keith. But he does it in September of election year. And then he says, well, I prosecuted 50 cases. 50 cases in over the course of 4 years amidst the greatest increase in violent crime in Minnesota's history. 50 cases, Keith. Now, I'm glad we got justice in those instances. I'm sure the families are incredibly grateful. Think about how many more families could have been delivered justice, things could have been prevented because we had justice on our streets. We could have had it. We don't have it because of your lack of leadership, Keith.
Okay, Keith Ellison, I'll give you like 30 seconds here.
We have taken all of the cases that the county referred to us, and we have responded with civil remedies that have been effective and delivered
face or otherwise. And so we do need to ensure that the religious rights of people in Minnesota, particularly religious minorities of people in Minnesota, are stood up for. I will tell you, I didn't get into this race for that issue. I got into this race because of the violent crime in our communities.
Keith Ellison, what's your position on abortion, and how will you use the office over the next 4 years to address that issue?
Well, women and everyone in our state can count on me to stand up for their rights to have a safe legal abortion. Full stop. They can count on me if they come to our state and they have an abortion here. I will defend their right to travel here and to do what is legal here. If some other state tries to extradite someone, I will oppose that. I believe that people have the right to bodily autonomy. I've always believed that. I'm consistent on that. Jim's not telling you that he also said in the primary that he would go on offense. Certainly said that. Maybe he could explain why. And also, he's on the board. He helped start a fake abortion clinic that tries to lure women in who are seeking abortions and then tries to give them misinformation as they seek to get that abortion care that they're looking for. And that place has its motto to make abortion not only illegal but unthinkable. And they tell people things like abortion causes cancer and all bunch of things that aren't even true. So look, Neil Gorsuch, Brett Kavanaugh, and Amy Coney Barrett all said, I'll just follow the law. What did they do the second they got a chance to rip down Roe? That is exactly what they did. They destroyed it, and that's what happened. I'm not really buying it, Jim. Sorry.
The state of Minnesota, though, did have several laws that restricted abortion. The case went to court. Your office lost the decision. The judge threw out those restrictions, and you chose not to appeal.
That's right.
Why?
Because we had already put 4,000 hours into the case at the district court level. We'd spent about $660,000 in salary time. We briefed the issue thoroughly, and Judge Gilligan issued an order that was around 100 pages, if not more. And it was well researched. We thought it was thought out, and we thought the chances of success were very minimal. So on the basis of just resources, we decided that an appeal was not in the interest of the people of the state of Minnesota.
Jim Schultz, you wanted to respond.
Yeah, I mean, there's a variety of misinformation in the Attorney General's statements there. It's hard to track through all of it. The fact is, everyone knows I stepped into this race to deal with the extraordinary violent crime consuming our communities. The fact is, the Attorney General's office has extraordinarily little influence over abortion policy in the state of Minnesota. And the fact is, Keith Ellison is using this as a distraction to get away from his failed record around violent crime, his failed record presiding over $250 million going out the door to a nonprofit the Department of Education and everyone else knew was fraudulent, to distract from his other incredible failures in his office. That's a fact. And at the end of the day, when Minnesotans go to the polls, they're going to be focused on wanting an Attorney General who is competent and who is focused on the violent crimes taking the lives of the sons and daughters of Minnesota.
Keith Ellison, but let's just keep the answers a little shorter because...
I'll keep it tight, sorry. Look, I think Minnesotans want an Attorney General who will protect their wallets and pocketbooks, their safety, and their rights. That's the job. I mean, here's the thing. You don't get to just say, I'm only here to work on one issue, which I don't have any legal authority for. You've got to deal with what comes through the door. I did not know we were going to have a global pandemic that would take the life of over 13,700 Minnesotans. I didn't know that George Floyd was going to be killed. You can't just say, I'm here only for one thing. No, you got to deal with everything. That's why me leading organizations like the Attorney General's office, like my own law firm, like the Legal Rights Center, that's why by being in Congress, by being in the state legislature, by practicing law for 32 years, that's why all of that really, really matters, because I bring all of it to bear to help lead the state. Jim, it's not just legal. It's not just litigation experience he lacks. He hasn't run any large organizations, and he has no public experience at all. So, I mean, there's a lot of deficits here.
I'll let you respond to that in just a minute, Jim Schultz. But Keith Ellison, this Feeding Our Future case was brought up.
Thanks for bringing it up.
When was the magnitude of this alleged fraud first brought to your attention, and what steps did your office take when you heard about this?
Thanks for asking. Here's the thing. This is a successful investigation and prosecution that was a collaboration between federal authorities and the state of Minnesota. There were 49 people who have been indicted. 3 of them have pled guilty today and are cooperating. And because of the collaboration, we believe that this whole thing has been pulled out root and branch. We found out, to answer your question directly, that there were discrepancies as early as the winter of 2020. That's why Feeding Our Future sued the state, and that's why they brought this matter to court alleging racial discrimination and a bunch of other stuff. But before that happened, we were in touch with the Department of Agriculture, the FBI, the Department of Justice, the IRS was involved, the United States Postal Service. There were a number of agencies involved in this investigation. But here's the thing, Mike, you got to understand. You cannot talk about a pending investigation. You can't talk about it. If you do talk about it, you tip off the fraudsters. If you tip off the fraudsters, phones get wiped, computers get wiped, documents get burned, people abscond and run out of the country, as 2 of them tried to do. And so, at the end of the day, we have 49 indictments. 3 have already pled guilty. We've identified property and we'll retrieve it, and we've got to the bottom of a fraud.
Okay.
They're
Jim
trying
Schultz?
to turn this into politics.
Well, let's let Jim Schultz
What's going on is a fraud investigation.
I'm going to take a little bit of extra time on this one, if that's okay. So in May of 2020, it became pretty evident to the Department of Education and others that there was serious fraud going on in Feeding Our Future. From that time until the end, there was over $200 million went out the door, almost 250, almost the entirety of that amount went out thereafter. The Attorney General's office in Minnesota represented the Department of Education through that. During that, the feds were not involved at that time. The FBI was not involved. The U.S. Attorney Office was not involved. They were informed in April 2021. So there's no kind of concerns about dealing with it, about getting in the way of their investigation through that time. Instead of advising the Department of Education to halt payments, instead of ensuring that they did an investigation in which it would have been pretty straightforward. It would not have taken Sherlock Holmes to crack this case. What you do is you subpoena the bank records associated with the accounts. And you see that those amounts are going to individuals who are going to buy properties worth a couple $1 million, or going to buy $90,000 trucks and so forth. This was not a significant case to handle. And unfortunately, the Attorney General's office, for some reason, maybe it was the campaign contributions, Keith, that you received from people associated with Feeding Our Future. Maybe it was something else, but you didn't pursue it. And then now, you've been lying about it consistently, Keith. First, it was the judge who made you do it. Who made you send out $200 million to people everyone knew was fraudulent. Then, it was the FBI who made you do it. I will tell you, the FBI does not tell victims of theft to send out $200 million to people you know to be thieves. So that's a lie. And then, Keith, you said to Vanina Soccer on the radio, you said you can't tell the truth about it because of attorney-client privilege. Again, a complete and total lie. Finally, you said you have no authority over it. That is, again, a complete and total lie. 602, 902, you could have brought a case under RICO to aggressively prosecute them, and you didn't. Keith, this is representative of the level of incompetence in your office and the level of dishonesty that you bring to the office.
Keith Ellison.
No, this is representative of the level of politics that's been going on in this race. Now, here's the reality. We contacted federal authorities, and they said, look, you've got to, we have an ongoing pending investigation. You cannot reveal that we're doing this. That's the reality of the situation. We know now that the investigation was sensitive, and that we had very aggressive litigants in this matter, and they could not be informed as to the investigation that was going on. Now, so that's the reality with the FBI. Now, let me just say this: if you have any doubts about that, let me just make it clear. Andy Lugar and the special agent in charge have had nothing but praise for the role that the state played. They have not done any of this stuff that the Republicans are trying to do. They have said, we want to thank the state for the role that they played in getting to the bottom of this fraud. Okay. Now, let me just say this about...
Let's let Jim Schultz respond.
So what the FBI said is they thanked the state for their cooperation. The FBI always does that, so long as you don't throw a wrench into an investigation.
They don't always do that.
That's what an FBI investigation will do. The fact is, Keith, you're pitting it on the FBI now. Who actually is the special agent in charge, Keith? Do you know his name? His name is Joe Thompson.
Of course,
and that's Representative Keith. You don't. I don't think you haven't been involved in this topic. You haven't been involved in this. You haven't been involved in this investigation.
I know the facts going back 3. I mean, I've known special agents in charge for years, Jim.
Yeah. Oh, have you? Okay. Well, you didn't seem to know that one. But the fact is, Keith, you were completely disconnected from this case.
One at a time, please.
Completely disconnected from this case. You've been completely missing in action on this matter and so many other matters in the state of Minnesota. The fact is you've been focused on pleasing your far-left extreme base that represents a small minority of Minnesotans, a small fraction of Minnesotans. And the fact is you were completely missing in action, and the result is $250 million at least, that we know of, has gone out the door to people everyone knew were fraudsters. And now you're saying this is a success. Keith, if that is a success, I would want to see what failure looks like, because this is the greatest failure in nonprofit oversight in Minnesota's history.
Keith Ellison, 30 seconds, then we have to move to closing statements.
Look, we have 49 indictments for fraudsters. 3 have pled guilty with the cooperation of the state. That is what has happened. Andy Lugar and the SAC have been clear that the state was helpful, did the right thing, and praised the work that we did. What you're hearing here is pure politics.
All right. Well, this has been a really good discussion. I appreciate both of you for having been here, and I think we should have scheduled 2 hours because there's a lot more to talk about. But unfortunately, we're up against the clock. Jim Schultz, you have 1 minute to close out here.
My animating principle in life is that every person, black, brown, or white, rich or poor, man or woman, is a child of God. They're a child of God that is of invaluable worth and that has rights that must be protected and defended. When I am the Attorney General, I will fight for all Minnesotans every day of the week. And we have to turn the page in this Attorney General's office. It's been held by one single party for over 50 years. We need change. We need a recalibration of that office to focus on the fundamental challenges that Minnesotans face. Right now, we have an Attorney General focused on other things. We have an Attorney General who's demonstrated his extremism by backing defunding the police, his incompetence by his failures in feeding our future, and dishonesty in lying about both. We have to turn the page to a new future for the state of Minnesota.
Keith Ellison, closing statement.
Let me thank you, NPR, and Jim Schultz today. You know, friends, we have a stark choice in front of us. I have led an office that prosecuted over 50 people, 27 successfully. We've never lost. Jim has never prosecuted anyone. He's never even stepped into court. I'll protect your right to choose. He will attack it. I've protected the wages, the farmers. I protected the consumers of people, and Jim, as a hedge fund lawyer, has enlarged the assets of the richest people in the world. In fact, during the pandemic, hedge funds made record profits, and so did his favorite group to stand up for, which is ExxonMobil. I'm the people's lawyer. I guess he's the ExxonMobil lawyer. The choice is clear. I ask for your vote.
Again, thank you very much. Wonderful discussion. I think it served our listeners well. Really appreciate it. Now we tell people to go out and vote.
That's right.
Make your choice. That is DFL Attorney General Keith Ellison, the Republican nominee Jim Schultz. Thanks again to both of our candidates for being here today and participating in this debate. We do have another debate coming up on October 28th between the leading candidates for governor, incumbent DFLer Tim Walz and Republican Scott Jensen. Again, that's October 28th at noon. Our producer today was Jeff Jones with help from Twyla Dang. Special thanks to Tom Campbell, Eric Stromstead, and Susie Kim Scott. I'm Mike Mulcahy. Thanks so much for listening today, and have a great weekend.
Thank you.